Hey, what's up? This is Jamal Abbott here to talk to you today about 5G. So, what we've accomplished and what's ahead for this technology. Last year is a good example of a lot of spending for this technology. We saw the carriers spend nearly $80 billion in spectrum, and that spectrum was going to be used for the expansion of their networks. With that expansion, that enables users of the 5G networks to get faster access to speeds and more coverage. We looked at the year prior, so back in 2020, for the nationwide deployment of low-band spectrum. So that was the 5G flavor that allowed for coverage, a little bit of a speed increase, but not much, but definitely expanded coverage, and that's what allowed for 5G to reach from coast to coast. Last year in 2021, we saw the focus and the emphasis on midband spectrum. So the midband spectrum combines the elements of speed and coverage. So this is definitely important, and this is reflected in the price that was spent on securing these airwaves to deploy this technology. So what we saw in 2021 was T-Mobile coming out ahead with finishing their nationwide midband spectrum deployment. And I have a few stats here from T-Mobile to share. And it says here that T-Band's ultra capacity 5G, so this is what they're calling their midband spectrum. And reminder here, this midband spectrum was from the acquisition from Sprint, so a couple years ago, looking at that already. So they deployed this spectrum and reached over 210 million people. So that's about 80% of T-Mobile customers. And that was done last year. So now they plan to do this and complete roughly 90% of the US population to cover midband spectrum for their network by 2023. So lots of good progress there made by T-Mobile, and looking forward to seeing what they're doing with that. The other thing that they did too, which is pretty interesting, is that they deployed their fixed wireless access solution, something that I've been pretty excited about, as that this is another type of connectivity that consumers can use for internet access. So if you think about the couple different options that we have for internet access, you have a couple wired connections, so that could be a cable connection, an Ethernet connection, or fiber connection coming into your home or business. With fixed wireless access, we're looking at a 5G connection coming to your home or business, and then you're getting equivalent speeds that you would normally get over a wired connection. So pretty amazing, and this is only the beginning. So we should see this progress and expand as the carriers deploy out these networks and then open this up for everybody to use. So we talked about how midband spectrum was acquired earlier in the year and how the carriers are going to put this to use. T-Mobile, no problem with them. They were able to do that with no issues. We did run into some speed bumps, unfortunately, with AT&T and Verizon. So what we're dealing with late last year and then coming into this year, which led to some delays, was that there was safety concerns about this spectrum that AT&T and Verizon has acquired during that auction last spring, and then how that might interfere with some aircrafts. So this is a major concern that's brought up by the FAA, and that they're concerned about this spectrum, this 5G frequencies and equipment may interfere with the safety of aircrafts. So this is something that is ongoing. There's talks about the FAA possibly delaying or looking to delay this planned rollout. So they're looking to delay this from AT&T and Verizon, who's looking to turn on the switch to use this equipment and to use this spectrum just this week. So more to come on how that transpires, but that's one of the issues that currently has to be worked out when it comes to midband spectrum for AT&T and Verizon. We also saw an auction that took place, so starting October 2021, this is the FCC Auction 110, and this was to auction off some additional midband spectrum. So this is the frequencies in the 3.45 to the 3.55 gigahertz range. So with C-band itself, we were looking at that between the 3.7 and the 4.2 gigahertz range. So different range, but this is another item of spectrum that was being auctioned off by the FCC. And then we have some results from that. So over $22 billion was spent on, I should actually say over $22 billion was committed to spend, because there hasn't been any checks written just yet. But these carriers have committed to spending money, and they're planning to use this for their 5G deployments. So with the breakdown here of who's going to spend what, topping off the list is going to be AT&T, and they've committed to spend $9 billion on this spectrum. Next after that is Dish, $7.3 billion. So good to see Dish there as they work to deploy their 5G network. We saw T-Mobile spend nearly $3 billion on Midband Spectrum. So they don't necessarily need a whole lot in this area. And this is something that they've stated publicly, but you see them in the mix here looking to acquire some additional spectrum for their war chest. And then Verizon spent nothing. So this could be telling. Maybe they feel confident in what they currently have in their spectrum position, or maybe they just saw this as something they didn't necessarily need. The thing to point out too with this spectrum auction is that new radios are going to be needed for the carriers. So anytime that you have spectrum, so this is the wireless real estate that these companies will be building their networks on, there's equipment, there's radios, and there's all sorts of other gadgets that are needed in order to take advantage and take full capabilities of the things that they've purchased for use. So they'll have to purchase new radios so that this can be used by the consumers. Now there's also talks about some smartphones not needing to have to upgrade their radios. So as long as they support the C-band spectrum, then they should support this this flavor of mid-band spectrum that's coming to the market here pretty soon. So this was just announced. We're going to hear some other updates from the carriers as they talk a little bit more about their plans. And this is forthcoming because they can't quite talk about it just yet. But we do have some earnings calls coming up here in the next few weeks and months ahead. And maybe we'll hear a little bit more about their plans. And then maybe even some other investor analysis and other things like that. So more to come with that. So that's what's happening with 5G for now, and what I'm seeing here coming ahead as far as what's going to be happening for 5G for 2022. We're going to see more expansion of fixed wireless access. So we've already seen what T-Mobile's done. Verizon has a couple things in the works, as well as AT&T, but we're probably going to see more of these offerings solidified and made more available to consumers. There's also even discussions about these carriers moving these offerings to a nationwide basis. So that was one of the things that intrigued me about this, is that the consumer will eventually have more options to work with when it comes to connectivity, and 5G is going to be one of those connectivity options to choose from. So good news for the consumer with that. And yeah, so more deployments, more build outs for these networks, and things are just going to keep rolling on. And hopefully we're not going to see too many more delays, but for the delays that do come up, I'm pretty confident that these things are going to be worked out. But it's going to be worked out in time and with collaboration with the parties that are affected by the delays and concerns that are being brought up. That's pretty much it for this episode. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to reach out to me, you have a couple different ways of hitting me up. I definitely want to hear your feedback and want to get your thoughts about what you think about 5G. So 5G is real. It's not going away. And if you think that this isn't happening, you should definitely follow the money and know what's going on. But these carriers are definitely spending the money, and there's lots of movement happening with 5G. Once again, this is Jamal Abbott. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon.